I didn't notice it the first night. Most people wouldn't have. Because nothing happened the way people expect things to happen when they matter. There was no sound, no movement, no moment that pulled attention. The security system logged activity just after 2 in the morning. Not an alert, not a warning, just a routine entry generated by a system, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Most nights, they appear quietly, sit in a log for a few hours, and disappear into archive folders no one ever opens again. That's how systems stay trusted. They work most of the time, and when they don't, they fail in small, forgettable ways. If you've ever worked around cameras long enough, you learn not to react to motion alerts emotionally. You learn to treat them like background noise. Air pressure shifts when a building cools overnight. Temperature changes because sensors to recalibrate. Occasionally, a camera reacts to something so small, a human wouldn't register it. The system reacts. Nothing follows. The day continues. That's what happened the first night. When I reviewed the footage later that morning, the hallway was empty. No doors opened. No lights shifted. No shadows crossed the frame. Just a static corridor recorded for 10 seconds. I closed the clip and moved on. Because that's what you do when something behaves almost the way it's supposed to. Before I go any further, let me say this. I don't collect stories. I don't look for explanations. I document patterns that don't announce themselves loudly enough to interrupt routine. If you want more of these records, you can subscribe. Not for notifications. Not because anything here resolves cleanly. Just so you know where to find this archive again. The building itself didn't raise questions. After, Horror's access was tightly controlled. Once the doors locked, nothing moved inside until morning. No overnight staff, no cleaning crews, no scheduled deliveries. That routine had been in place for years. People trusted it because it worked. And because nothing had ever forced them to look closer. The camera network was older, but stable. It recorded continuously, tagged motion automatically, archived footage without interpretation. It didn't improvise. Systems like that don't think. They compare one moment to the next. If something changes beyond a set threshold, they log it. They don't ask why. They don't consider context. They simply record that something was different. The next morning, I powered up the monitors the way I always did. No anticipation. No curiosity. I scrolled through the overnight log while checking emails and reports that mattered more. Most nights, there was nothing worth opening. But there it was again. Another entry. Same camera. Same hallway. Same duration. 10 seconds. Same timestamp. 2:17. I opened the footage. Nothing. The hallway looked exactly the way it always did. Clean, still, unoccupied. I let the clip play all the way through. Then I replayed it. There was nothing to notice. Nothing that suggested movement or interruption. I minimized the window and continued with the rest of the log. 2 identical alerts, 24 hours apart, didn't feel important. Systems repeat errors all the time. If anything, what stood out was how ordinary it looked. No escalation, no warnings, no visible malfunction. I didn't adjust any settings, didn't recalibrate the sensor, didn't flag the clips for review. Automated systems are designed to correct themselves, and most of the time, they do. By the 3rd morning, the entry was still there. Same camera, same hallway, same 10 seconds, and the same time. 2:17 a.m. That was the first moment I hesitated before closing the window. Not because I felt threatened, but because repetition that precise rarely happens by accident. Machines don't remember. They don't anticipate. They don't know what day it is. They don't understand routine. And yet, this alert didn't appear every night. It appeared only on weekdays. Never on weekends. Neither on holidays. That detail didn't change anything, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. I checked the access logs. No keycards used, no doors opened, no alarm events. Everything confirmed what the footage showed. An empty building, everything except the camera. I didn't start an investigation. I didn't escalate it. I didn't call anyone. Observations like that don't translate well when spoken out loud. They sound insignificant the moment you try to explain them. So I reached for a notepad beside the monitor and wrote one thing down. 217 am not as evidence. Not as a warning. Just a note. By the end of the first week, the alert had blended into routine. I expected it the way you expect a clock to tick. Not because I understood it, but because it had never failed to appear. I'd scroll past the entry, pause briefly, and move on. It wasn't fear that slowed me down. It was familiarity. That night, the building locked the same way it always did. Lights off, systems armed. Silence settling into places no one was listening to. I didn't stay to watch. At 2:17 a.m., the camera recorded activity again. 10 seconds. Nothing visible. That was the point where the record stopped being accidental. Not dramatic enough to alarm anyone. Not obvious enough to interrupt routine. But consistent enough that ignoring it started to feel deliberate. And if you're listening closely, you already understand why that matters. Because once something repeats without a cause, the question isn't what triggered it. It's why it keeps happening at all. By the time the second week began, the alert no longer surprised me. Not because it made sense, but because it had never failed to appear. There's a difference between understanding something and expecting it. I didn't understand why the camera kept logging activity, but I expected to see the entry when I opened the system each morning. That expectation settled in quietly. The mornings followed the same rhythm. I'd sit down, power on the monitors, scroll through the overnight log, most of it blurred together. No activity, no entries, nothing that required attention. And then, without exception, the same line would appear. Same camera, same 10 seconds. 2:17 am I stopped opening the clip immediately. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew what it would show. An empty corridor, unchanged lighting, no visible movement. Watching it again didn't feel investigative. It felt repetitive, so I'd let the clip sit there while I finished other tasks, emails, reports, notes that demanded clearer decisions. The alert didn't interrupt routine. It waited. When I finally opened it, the result was always the same. Nothing, no difference between this night and the last. No escalation, no escalation. Just 10 seconds of absence, recorded with consistency. I started paying attention to details that hadn't mattered before. Not in the footage, but around it. The length of the clip never changed. The timestamp never drifted. The camera never switched modes. It didn't behave like a system struggling. It behaved like a system executing a task. I checked other cameras more carefully. Same nights, same hours. Nothing, no alerts, no entries. Whatever the system was responding to, it wasn't happening everywhere. It was isolated. That isolation mattered more than I expected. Random errors scatter. They show up in different places, at different times. This didn't. It stayed confined. One camera, one hallway, one moment in the night. I didn't label it a pattern out loud. I didn't need to. Patterns don't require acknowledgement to exist. They only require consistency. And this had it. At some point, I stopped thinking of the alert as something that happened. It became something that arrived, like a scheduled process, like a background task the system ran without instruction. I checked the logs from earlier months, not because I expected to find the same entry, but because I wanted to know when it started. The records didn't give me a clear answer. There was no obvious beginning, no first instance that stood out. The alert simply appeared and then continued. The building didn't change during that time. No renovations, no rewiring, No new equipment installed. The hallway remained what it had always been. Unremarkable, functional, easy to ignore, which made the camera's attention feel misplaced. I started noticing how little time the alert occupied. 10 seconds, that was all. Out of an entire night, out of hours of recording, the system selected 10 seconds and marked them as different, not important. That distinction stayed with me. The system wasn't signaling danger. It wasn't escalating. It was simply identifying a deviation and doing it again. I considered adjusting my routine, opening the clip immediately, watching it live if I could. But there was nothing urgent enough to justify changing habits. If anything, the alert felt patient. It didn't demand attention. It waited to be noticed. By the middle of the second week, I could predict the order of things. Scroll, pause, see the timestamp, 2:17, and move on. The repetition didn't create fear. It created familiarity. And familiarity has a way of lowering defenses. I started wondering how many times something like this could repeat before it stopped being background noise. Not because it became threatening, but because it refused to disappear. I checked the calendar, weekdays only, Monday through Friday. Never Saturday, never Sunday. The alert respected days the way people do. That observation didn't lead anywhere, but it didn't leave either. I didn't mention it to anyone, not because it was secret, but because it didn't sound like anything when spoken aloud. There's a camera that records nothing every night. That's not a concern. That's a sentence that ends conversations. So I kept it in the logs and in my notes. At some point, the alert stopped feeling like a malfunction. It felt intentional, not by something, just in itself. As if the system had settled into a behavior and saw no reason to change it. The building continued to empty itself each night. Lights off, doors locked, systems armed. Nothing new. At 2:17 a.m. The camera recorded activity. 10 seconds. Nothing visible. I didn't stay awake to watch it happen. There was nothing to see. But by then I was no longer dismissing it either. Because once something repeats often enough, ignoring it becomes a choice. And I was starting to realize that I'd been choosing that option for longer than I thought. At some point, ignoring a pattern stops feeling neutral. Not because it becomes threatening, but because it starts to feel careless. That's usually when people do something small, not to solve the issue, just to prove to themselves that they tried. That's where I was. I didn't start with anything dramatic. I adjusted the camera's sensitivity by a fraction. Not enough to disable alerts, just enough to rule out overreaction. The next morning, the entry was still there. Samey camera, samey hallway. Samey 10 seconds. 2:17 am nothing visible. I reverted the setting and tried something else. I altered the detection zone slightly, shrinking it, then expanding it back to its original shape. That change should have produced variation. It didn't. The alert appeared as if nothing had been touched. I checked the camera's maintenance history. No recent faults, no reported instability, no firmware updates that might explain new behavior. The system wasn't compensating for failure. It was operating normally. I began paying closer attention to the environment's lighting schedules, automatic dimming, night mode transitions. Everything switched when it was supposed to. Nothing overlapped with the timestamp. The alert didn't coincide with change. It arrived after everything had already settled. I compared footage frame by frame, not looking for movement, but for difference, brightness, contrast, noise. There were none that persisted. Each night matched the last with a level of consistency that ruled out coincidence. I considered the possibility that the camera was responding to something outside the frame. Not a person, not an object, just something passing through in a way the lens couldn't capture. But that idea didn't hold. The camera's angle hadn't changed in years. Its field of view was stable. If something external was responsible, it would have affected other cameras too. It didn't. I checked adjacent systems, access logs, environmental sensors, building automation records. No corresponding activity. The camera reacted alone. That isolation changed how the alert felt. It no longer seemed like a system-wide issue. It felt local, contained. I adjusted the recording settings. Extended pre-roll, longer post-roll. If something was happening just before or after the 10 seconds, I wanted to see it. The next morning, the clip was longer. The result was an empty hallway, unchanged lighting, no visible cause. At some point, intervention stopped feeling productive. Not because it failed, but because it never altered the outcome. Every adjustment returned the same result. The system reacted, the footage remained empty. I considered resetting the camera entirely. A full reboot. That would have erased continuity. It would have given me a clean slate. I didn't do it, not because I was afraid of losing data, but because I wanted to know whether the pattern depended on memory. So I left the system intact. The alert continued, week after week, always the same. I stopped checking the clip every morning. Instead, I checked the log. I looked for the timestamp first. If it was there, I moved on. The footage didn't need review anymore. I already knew what it contained. The strange thing wasn't that the alert persisted. It was that nothing else responded to my changes. No degradation, no escalation, no sign that the system even registered interference. It was as if the camera didn't care what I did, as long as it was still there at 2:17. That realization didn't produce fear. It produced distance. The sense that I was no longer observing something in progress. I was observing something that had already settled. The building remained unchanged. Night after night, it emptied itself, doors locked, lights off, systems armed, and at 2:17 a.m., the camera recorded activity. 10 seconds, nothing visible. By then, intervention no longer felt like a solution. It felt like interruption, and whatever was happening didn't seem interested in being interrupted. I stopped adjusting settings, stopped testing variables, stopped expecting different results. The record continued without my participation. That was the moment I realized that the pattern wasn't waiting to be fixed. It was waiting to be acknowledged. And acknowledgement doesn't always change anything. Sometimes it only makes absence harder to ignore. There's a point where attention stops being useful. Not because it fails, but because it starts changing the way you experience everything else. I reached that point quietly. I didn't make a decision to stop checking the camera. I just noticed that I was doing it less. The log would open. My eyes would scan for the timestamp. If it was there, I didn't open the clip. If it wasn't, I didn't feel relieved. Either way, nothing changed. The footage had become predictable. 10 seconds. Empty hallway. No deviation. Watching it no longer felt like observation. It felt like confirmation. And confirmation doesn't require presence. I stopped writing notes, not because there was nothing to record, but because nothing new was entering the record. Samey time, samey duration, samey absence. Writing it down again felt redundant. At work, the building remained functional. People moved through it during the day. Conversations overlapped. Doors opened and closed. Nothing about the place suggested irregularity. The system blended back into background. That contrast made the nights feel separate. I began to notice how often people trust systems, not because they understand them, but because they stop noticing them. That's when trust becomes invisible, and invisibility is hard to interrupt. The camera didn't demand attention. It didn't alert loudly. It didn't escalate. It simply continued responding at the same moment each night. That consistency made it easy to look away. I told myself that if anything changed, I'd notice. If the duration increased, if the timestamp shifted, if another camera reacted. None of that happened, so I kept my distance. There's comfort in stepping back. It allows routine to reassert itself. The more familiar the alert became, the less it felt like something that needed to be addressed. That's not denial, that's adaptation. I checked the system less frequently. Some mornings, I didn't open the logs at all. Other mornings, I did, but only long enough to confirm that nothing had interrupted the pattern. Time passed without marking itself. Days blurred into weeks. The alert never announced those transitions. It respected them. Weekdays only, never weekends, never holidays. As if it was following the same calendar as everyone else. That detail should have felt important. Instead, it felt settled. I stopped thinking of the alert as something external. It wasn't happening to the system, it was simply part of it. A background behavior that didn't disrupt function. I wondered how many things persist that way. Not because they're unsolved, but because they're non-invasive. They don't interfere enough to require correction. They don't escalate enough to demand response. They just continue. At some point, I realized that the system didn't slow down, the alert didn't weaken, the pattern didn't drift. It continued without my attention. That realization carried a different weight. Not fear, resignation, the understanding that whatever was being recorded didn't depend on being observed. I no longer thought about intervening. There was nothing left to adjust that hadn't already been adjusted. Nothing left to test that hadn't already been tested. The system had settled into itself. The building emptied every night the same way it always had. Doors locked. Lights off. Silence returning to familiar corners. At 2:17 a.m., the camera recorded activity. 10 seconds. Nothing visible. By then, stepping back wasn't avoidance. It was acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't seek resolution. The kind that accepts continuation as an outcome. I let the system run. I let the logs fill. I let the record remain incomplete. Because not everything that repeats is meant to be resolved. Sometimes, the most accurate record is the one you stop updating. Nothing ended. That's the part people usually expect, an interruption, a failure, a moment where something finally breaks. That didn't happen here. The alert didn't stop suddenly. It didn't escalate either. It continued. Samey camera, same hallway, samey 10 seconds, same time, 2:17 a.m. If there was a moment where the pattern concluded, it didn't announce itself. There was no last entry that felt different from the others. No final deviation. Just another logline identical to the one before it. By then, I wasn't watching for change anymore. I was watching for absence. And even that never arrived. At some point, I realized that the record had become complete without ever reaching an answer. Every night added confirmation, not clarity. The system kept reacting. The footage stayed empty. That balance never shifted. I considered exporting the clips, creating a separate archive, labeling it clearly. But labels imply conclusions, and I didn't have one. So I left everything where it was, in the system, in the logs. Among entries no one else would ever review. The building didn't acknowledge the pattern. It didn't need to. During the day, it functioned as expected. People moved through the hallway without noticing anything unusual. The camera watched them the same way it always had. Nothing about the space felt altered, which made the nights feel isolated from context. Eventually, I stopped checking the logs altogether, not out of fear, out of recognition. The alert no longer required observation to continue existing, and my attention wasn't changing it. There's a moment when documentation stops being useful, not because it's incomplete, but because it has already captured everything it's going to capture. This record reached that point quietly, without conclusion, The system remained active. The camera stayed online. The hallway remained empty. At 2:17 a.m. The camera recorded activity. 10 seconds. Nothing visible. I don't know how long it continued after that. I stopped marking the days, stopped counting the repetitions. The pattern no longer depended on measurement. That's where the record ends. Not because something was solved, but because nothing new entered it. Sometimes, the most accurate description of an event is not what happened, but what continued happening without interruption. This was one of those cases. A system responding, a space remaining empty, a pattern repeating without explanation. I didn't shut the camera down. I didn't reset it. I didn't intervene again. I let the system do what it had been doing all along. If you're looking for a conclusion, there isn't one here. Only experiences, and the absence it recorded. That's all this ever was. A record of activity, with nothing visible to account for it.